At some point, you realize it's not just a job. It's the environment. Because you can handle work, you can handle the responsibilities, you can handle being busy, and you can handle the pressure. But what you can't deal with is the unnecessary stress, that toxic energy, the lack of support, the constant feeling of being on edge. And once you realize that, everything starts to make sense. Why you're so tired, why your mood shifts, why don't you feel like yourself anymore? It's not because you can't handle work. It's because you're in a space that is constantly taking from you. And the moment that realization hits, you start looking at things differently. There's no more blaming yourself. You stop forcing yourself to push through. You stop normalizing what doesn't feel right. And you start asking better questions. Like, is this worth it? Is it sustainable? Is this where I want to be long term? And those questions, they change everything, because once you see it clearly, you can't unsee it. Now be honest, have you had this realization?
This is why you keep your distance at work now. Nothing's wrong with you, but something is likely wrong with the environment, because you didn't start like this. You showed up open. You were friendly. You actually wanted to connect with the people around you. You trusted the culture to be what it claimed to be. But then you started paying attention to things, how the culture rewarded certain people and quietly buried others, how casual conversation became ammunition, how the hallway smile and the boardroom decisions were two very different things. And your discernment was right. You saw exactly what it was. So you adjusted. You stopped sharing as much. You stopped giving every room full access to you. You got thoughtful about who you showed the real you to. I know it because I've been there too.
After watching those clips, I'm sure many of you can relate to this. The reality is employees come to work wanting to contribute. They want to be productive. They want to grow. Employees actually want to use their talents in the workplace, right? But oftentimes things happen. Things take a turn. The environment changes. Stress increases. Emotional labor increases. Employees stop raising ideas. Your colleagues stop giving feedback. They just stop speaking up during meetings, right? And eventually, they just disengage from the workplace. And they just disconnect themselves even from their colleagues. So the question I want to explore today is, how does a workplace get to this point? Let's talk about this. How does an organization go from a place where people collaborate and innovate to a place where employees are afraid to speak, afraid to challenge, and simply just trying to survive? Hello there. My name is Dr. Sarah Basharan, and I'm an industrial organizational psychologist, and my work focuses on studying human behavior in the workplace and how that behavior impacts strategic organizational outcomes. Today, I want to look at workplace toxicity, but through the lens of psychology, organizational science, and biblical wisdom. Because you see, if we want to fix toxic workplaces, we have to understand how they were created. And the reality is, toxic workplaces don't happen overnight. One of the biggest misconceptions about toxic workplaces is that they suddenly appear. They don't. Toxic cultures are usually built through repeated patterns of behavior that become normalized, unfortunately. Organizational psychologists often study this through concepts like organizational culture, psychological safety, leadership behavior, social learning theory. And culture is essentially the way we do things around here. The problem is that organizations don't just create culture through policies. It's people. People create culture through daily behaviors. And a toxic workplace may begin with small things, such as a leader who dismisses feedback, a supervisor who rewards fear instead of collaboration, employees who stop trusting each other, a culture where silence becomes safer than honesty, And eventually people just adapt. And this adaptation is important to look at. Because sometimes what looks like an employee not caring is actually an employee protecting themselves. Yes. So let's talk about what happens psychologically when people feel unsafe at work, when they just shut down. Because research on psychological safety introduced by Harvard professor Amy Edmondson shows that employees are more likely to contribute ideas, admit mistakes, and speak up when they believe their voice will be respected. But when psychological safety disappears, people become silent. They just stop offering suggestions. They avoid taking risks. They just stop challenging ineffective processes. Why? Because the human brain is constantly scanning for threats. And when employees repeatedly experience things like being ignored, being embarrassed, being punished for honesty, and being blamed unfairly, their brain begins to associate speaking up with danger. This is connected to the stress response. You see, the workplace becomes a place where the employee is no longer asking things like, how can I contribute? They're asking, how do I protect myself in this toxic environment? And that shift is incredibly damaging because organizations don't just lose productivity, they lose human potential. And that's what they do not want. So let's look at the culprits behind toxic workplaces, shall we? So who creates toxic workplaces? Well, here's where we need some balance here, because toxicity is rarely caused by only one person. These environments are usually caused by multiple contributing factors, such as a destructive leadership. And research on abusive supervision examines patterns where leaders consistently use behaviors that harm employees' psychology. For example, destructive leaders can use public humiliation, right? Excessive criticism, taking credit for other people's work, creating fear. Leaders set the emotional temperature of a workplace. And I'm sure many of you know this already. There's some other areas of destructive leadership, such as lack of accountability. And a workplace becomes toxic when harmful behaviors are tolerated. And if high performers can mistreat others without consequences, the message becomes, well, this is acceptable here. All right? Other things that happen in toxic environments, poor systems. Sometimes the problem isn't just people, it's the system, and unrealistic workloads is a symptom of that. Poor communication structures, lack of resources, unclear expectations. These are all symptoms of poor systems. Another contributing factor to toxic environment is fear-based culture. This is one of the biggest. When employees believe that honesty will hurt them, so silence becomes the survival strategy. So here's why toxic cultures are hard to clear out. And a great question is, if everyone knows it's toxic, why doesn't someone fix it, right? See, the thing is, organizations are human systems, yes? And psychologists study this through concepts such as status quo bias, which is people often resist change because even unhealthy situations can feel very familiar over time. So there can also be things like fearing of losing power, fear of conflict, and leaders protecting their image. Employees just feel hopeless. So toxic cultures survive because people just adapt to them, honestly. They just becomes normal. But normal doesn't mean healthy. Doesn't mean healthy. So what does research say to help us with this? Well, research points towards several solutions. For example, healthy workplaces are rebuilt through concepts such as psychological safety, we've talked about already. Employees also need environments where speaking up is valued, and trust-based leadership. Leaders must model honesty, humility, and accountability. All right? And employees need to feel like they have a voice. Organizations need systems where feedback leads to action. And also we need to leverage strength-based leadership. People thrive when their abilities are recognized and developed. But here's the important point. Creating a healthy workplace is everyone's responsibility. Leaders have greater influence because of their position, but employees also influence culture through their choices, communication styles, and behaviors. Now, let's look at this toxic workplace issue through the lens of biblical wisdom, shall we? Now, the Bible actually does talk about setting the standards for good relationships and good leadership. If we look in the book of Genesis, it shows us the original design. Human beings were created to cultivate, create, and bring order. And work was not created to be a place of fear. It was created to be meaningful. If we look in the book of Proverbs, chapter 29, verse 2, it says, when the righteous thrive, the people rejoice. When the wicked rule, the people groan. See, leadership affects people. Also in the book of Romans, chapter 12, verse 18, it reminds us, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Now, this doesn't mean accepting unhealthy treatment. It just means each person has a responsibility to contribute towards peace, integrity, and restoration. Yes. So, if you are in a toxic workplace today, I want you to ask yourself this. Is this a difficult season in my career, my work day that can be improved? Is this a culture problem? Or is this a leadership problem? Or is this an environment that just consistently prevents people from thriving? Because the goal is not just to survive workplaces. The goal is to understand how workplaces can become environments where people contribute, innovate, grow, and experiencing meaningful work and meaningful relationships too. Because organizations are not just buildings, policies, and profits. Organizations are people. And when we understand human behavior, we can begin creating workplaces where both people and performance can thrive. If you have enjoyed what you've heard, the best place to let me know is to let me in the comments section and give me a thumbs up. If you've subscribed already, I'm really thankful for this. I really appreciate it. If you haven't subscribed, get subscribed so you don't miss out on content such as this. Until next time, I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.